Hi, this is Melissa with StitchScene.com, and today we're going to talk a little bit about swatching to gauge. Now, swatching to gauge is important for two reasons. One, if your gauge is not accurate, you could end up with a project that is larger or smaller than you intended it to be. So swatching to gauge is critical for projects that are to be a certain size. Secondly, if your gauge is not correct, you could run out of yarn, and that is never a good thing. And so we're going to begin by talking a little bit about the gauge that can be found at the beginning of your pattern. So pick up any pattern, and at the front of the instructions, usually at the top, you're going to see a heading called gauge, and it will say something like 11 double crochets per 4 inches, or 11 double crochets and 6 rows per 4 inches. That's what mine says. It says that it can be obtained with a size G hook. Now, that is a good place to start. Begin your gauge swatch with the size G hook. You want to make a foundation chain that is going to be long enough to measure at least 4 inches. I recommend 6, so that you can take measurements in several areas of the swatch. So you're going to start with a foundation chain, and then you're going to begin to just work in the stitch that the gauge calls for. In this case, it called for double crochets. So I have worked a series of rows in double crochet. And I worked it with the G hook. Now, let's see if that came out correctly. How we're going to do that is we're going to take a hard-sided ruler. A flexible ruler will not work. It won't be as accurate. So you want to use a hard ruler. And we're going to mark where the 0 begins, and at the 4, because we're looking to get 11 stitches per 4 inches. I'm going to remove the ruler, and let's count how many stitches we get per 4 inches. 1 double crochet, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Let's count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So that is correct. Had it not been correct, we would want to adjust our hook size. It is critical that you get your gauge swatch correct. You do not need to match the hook size that the pattern calls for, but you do need to match the gauge that the pattern calls for. Had there been, let's say, 12 stitches in these 4 inches, we would want to change our hook size to a larger hook, such as the H, because then we had too many stitches, and with a larger hook, we would get less stitches. Had there been too little, let's say there had only been 8 or 9 double crochets per 4 inches, we would want to go to a smaller hook size to make more stitches per inch. And that is all there is to swatching to gauge. It really is rather simple. It's necessary. And then when you're done, you have this nice swatch that you can launder before making your project to see if the yarn is the quality that you would like, that it's going to hold up as well as you like, whether it's going to pill. If you're felting, it's a good test swatch for felting. If you plan to do anything different to the project, such as ironing it to kill the fabric, whatever you're going to do, you want to make sure you have a gauge swatch to practice on. Now, double crochets are very easy to count per 4 inches. However, there are some stitch patterns, such as the crunch stitch pattern, where the stitches are very, very crumpled up and very, very tight, and they can be very difficult to count. So in that case, I would recommend, counting, putting your ruler up here, counting the stitches per 4 inches there, moving it over here, counting per 4 inches here, making sure you have good lighting. Let's talk about row gauge as well too. Now the pattern that I was looking at called for 6 rows per 4 inches. So again, we take and place our pin at the 0 and at the 4. And we count rows. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're right on. That is not always the case. So again, it is very important that you adjust your hook size to reflect the gauge that the pattern calls for if you want to have it true to the pattern size. Otherwise, again, just being off as little as 1 stitch per 4 inches can result in a project that is 1 size larger or 1 size smaller than you intended it to be. And that's really all there is to gauge swatching. Now you know how to do it, no excuses.